Hi class, this screencast is about personality disorders. If you watched the last screencast, you know it was long, so I will try and keep this one short. But I'm keeping it short because I want you to access the DSM. And I want you to do that online through Northwest College's library. There's tutorial videos on the Moodle site for the class that teach you how to do that. I want you to look up the personality disorders, read them, understand them. It's the best way to get acquainted with that material. Your discussion section for this week has case examples from the DSM for Casebook, and I want you to read those. Try to figure out which disorder matches up with what diagnosis. So not every personality disorder is there, but if you read the DSM-4 or DSM-5, it doesn't matter at this point. You can use the case studies and make an attempt at a diagnosis based on the symptoms that you read in the case studies. So watch those videos, get that done. If you have any questions, let me know. So when we talk about personality disorders, what we're really looking at are personality traits that people have. Now, personality disorders, if you remember correctly, are on what axis of the DSM diagnostic system? Axis 1 or axis 2? That's a good question for the final exam. So personality disorders are on axis 2. Other clinical disorders are on axis 1. So personality disorders have kind of a different flair to them. So there's a term that psychiatrists use. It's kind of an older term, but I like the meaning of it. One is ego-syntonic, and the other one is ego-dystonic. And ego-syntonic, well, actually, let's start with ego-dystonic. So your ego, that's a Freudian term. And that's kind of like your sense of self. Dystonia or dystonic means like discomfort. And so an ego-dystonic disorder is a disorder that you don't feel good about having. If somebody has anxiety or depression, do you hear them say like, oh, I like being anxious or I like being depressed? The answer to that one should be no. However, when you look at the personality disorders, those disorders were conceptualized as being ego-syntonic, that they're in like synthesis with the ego. The person has a disorder, but that's who they are. It doesn't really bother them. The personality disorders mostly bother other people. And it's because your personality is who you are. It's who you, it's your enduring set of behavioral traits, mood traits. So when we talk about a personality trait, what we're talking about is an enduring pattern of perceiving, relating to, and thinking about the environment and others. So personality traits are relatively stable. So if you were a picky child, you might likely be a picky adult. So when somebody has a personality disorder, and I want to make another side note here that personality disorders are only diagnosed in adults, so 18 and over. Put that in your notes. Personality disorders are ingrained patterns of relating to other people, situations, and events with a rigid and maladaptive pattern of inner experiences and behavior. Now, even though these are only diagnosed in adults, you're going to see the pattern dating back to adolescence or early adulthood. One personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, which many people think of that the wrong way. They think of it as somebody that's not social and they don't like to go to a party. That is very, very wrong. So look up antisocial personality disorder if you don't know what that's all about. That requires that you have a conduct disorder or meet the criteria for conduct disorder as a child. So there's a qualifier there. But again, only diagnosed in adults. And what we look at is that behavior patterns must manifest themselves in at least two of the following four areas. So cognition, how you think about events, your thinking can be distorted in very specific ways. Different personality disorders will have different impacts on cognition. Affectivity is your emotional response to particular stimuli. So how do you react to stimuli? Let's say somebody, you're in a relationship and somebody breaks up with you. How do you react to the breakup? That's your affectivity. What do? Do you go to your room and cry for a couple hours and then go get some ice cream and get over it? Or do you threaten suicide? Call the individual that broke up with you and threaten suicide over the phone. That would be affectivity. And then interpersonal functioning. How do you relate to people on an interpersonal level? You're going to see distortions in interpersonal functioning in the personality disorders. And then impulse control. Do you have the ability to delay gratification? So the DSM-4 groups the 11 diagnoses into 3 clusters based on shared characteristics. The DSM-5 has the same clusters. So we have cluster A, cluster B, and cluster C. So cluster A is eccentric individuals. That's very important. So cluster B has dramatic behavior at the core of the diagnoses, and then cluster C is anxiety. So for cluster A, the DSM, sometimes odd or eccentric, you should probably put odd in your notes. And the 3 personality disorders that are in cluster A are paranoid personality disorder, schizoid personality disorder, and schizotypal personality disorder. And I want you to note that at the end of every personality disorder, the words personality disorder are going to be there. So you'll know that's a personality disorder. Paranoid personality disorder is characterized by a pervasive pattern of suspiciousness and mistrust of other people. Oftentimes they have misinterpretation of other people's motives as being hostile towards them. Schizoid personality disorder is a lack of interest in social relationships and withdrawal from social relationships. Disrupted social functioning. And then schizotypal personality disorder is characterized by difficulty in interacting socially and discomfort interacting socially. Schizotypal will also have distortion in cognitions and might be characterized by some odd behavior. Cluster B personality disorders, I want you to go beyond dramatic and think dramatic, emotional, and erratic. So cluster B personality disorders are antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, and narcissistic personality disorder. So antisocial personality disorder is a pervasive pattern of violation of the of rules and rights of other people. So you're constantly like breaking social norms and violating other people's rights. So antisocial is more like a career criminal or something like that. Then don't think that it's somebody that doesn't want to be social. That's not it. That would be schizoid or schizotypal. Borderline personality disorder is a pervasive pattern of instability in relationships, self-image, and identity. So these individuals will oftentimes have very intense and unstable relationships, and will often display behavior that is a frantic attempt to avoid abandonment, whether it's real or imagined. Histrionic personality disorder is a pervasive pattern of excessive attention seeking and emotionality. So these individuals are constantly trying to draw attention to themselves. They may do so like inappropriately through like sexual seduction, stuff like that. And then their emotionality is incredibly excessive, but it's to draw attention to themselves. And then lastly, narcissistic personality disorder is a pervasive pattern of grandiosity, lack of empathy for other people, and an excessive need for admiration. Now, another side note, I want you to know that you may have heard the term psychopath, or somebody is a psychopath, or they have psychopathy. In the forensic world, we talk about that a lot. There is no DSM diagnosis for a psychopath. However, if you combine the criteria of antisocial personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder together, it's roughly the similar criteria to what is commonly referred to as a psychopath. Cluster C is the anxious, and then add fearful there. Anxious and fearful cluster. So this cluster consists of avoidant personality disorder, dependent personality disorder, and listen carefully, obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Very different from just obsessive compulsive disorder. So that's obsessive compulsive personality disorder. So avoidant personality disorder is characterized by like extreme sensitivity in social interactions, different from schizoid that they'll want to interact with other people, but they're very, very sensitive to social interaction. If there's any sort of negative criticism or negative feeling, they're very in tune to that and over exaggerate it. These individuals feel inadequate in social interactions. Dependent personality disorder is a pervasive pattern of needing to be cared for by someone else. So these individuals are, like almost always in relationships, and they are defined by the relationship. It's like they do not exist out of some sort of relationship with another person, whether that be romantic or otherwise. And lastly, obsessive compulsive personality disorder. This is a pervasive pattern of rigid adherence to rules. So these individuals follow rules. They make rules for themselves, other people. Oftentimes they'll have lists of how things should be done, and things have to follow the list or an agenda. They are also very controlling and control others people's behavior, and they are very perfectionistic to the point where the major point of the activity is lost in an attempt to achieve perfectionism. Sometimes it interferes with completing tasks. So those are the three clusters and the disorders within each. Look at the differences between the DSM-4 and the DSM-5. Again, use this information to make the diagnoses. One way to remember these, and I will make a note here that this is not a very sensitive or politically correct way to identify these clusters. It's very insensitive, but oftentimes students are able to remember the clusters better based on this. So cluster A, odd and eccentric, they'll use the term weirdo, or I'm sorry, weirdo here. Dramatic, erratic, and emotional, they'll use the term wacko. And then cluster C, the anxious, they'll use the term weenie. Again, not very sensitive, so weirdo, wacko, and weenie, but it'll help you remember that it's just a mnemonic trick. Don't use that in the professional world, however. So that's it for personality disorders. If you have any questions, please let me know.